basic information security 101 kind of concept. So CIA stands for confidentiality, availability, and integrity. So when you're looking at your system, think, okay, where in my system is confidentiality important? Am I storing something that other people wouldn't want to see? Passwords, credit cards, phone numbers, social security, what have you. How can that confidentiality be compromised? The integrity. Are people relying on my system and the data it serves to be what it's supposed to be? Is there some sort of assumption or reliability involved in it? So if I'm ordering a product on eBay, I want to make sure that that is the actual product and it's not something false. And then availability, this is denial of service. We want to make sure that these assets are there when our customers, our clients, want them to be there. So this kind of makes up the CIA triad. So when you talk about information security concepts, like take cryptography, for instance. Cryptography always enhances confidentiality because you're making it more private. It enhances the integrity in the sense that it's been encrypted, so using like PKI and digital signature stuff, you can assume that it hadn't been contaminated en route. But cryptography will only ever hamper availability. You can't encrypt something and make it more easy to access. So these are just kind of like ideas, concepts you want to keep in mind when you look at these things. So taint propagation analysis. I'll give you a second to handle the name there. There's always giggles whenever you say that. So you want to assume that all user input is tainted. So the easiest way to find vulnerabilities in your system is look at it and figure out where stuff's coming in and where stuff's going out, and those are your vulnerabilities. If you didn't accept user input, it would run exactly as it's supposed to run. There'd be no problem. This is an example here from this company called Fortify. They're a source code analysis software. And here's an example of what we call taint analysis. So, up here at the top, we're taking in a user argument. It's being stored here as args. Then those arguments are being passed into username string. And then that's being concatenated with this SQL-like statement for this query string. And then that's being executed, right? That seems perfectly fine, right? So I put in Bob. Bob gets eventually transferred down here to query, and then it executes and looks for a username and password equal to Bob, right? No problem. But what if I put Bob semicolon and then something bad afterwards? That's the essence of a command injection attack. So again, this is a very basic, kind of academic example, but this is the kind of stuff you want to do. You want to look, where the stuff's going in, where it's bouncing around internally, and what happens to it once it's in there. A good example, I was working with one of our developers, and they had this disk-based backup system. And the idea is you would log in this application, give it credentials, it would go mount a drive somewhere using those credentials, back up whatever needed to, and get rid of the mount. Well, that's great. So I started asking him, okay, so where's the credentials stored? Okay, well, they're in the database. Are they secure? Yeah, they're encrypted. So we started talking about, where the stuff is and whatnot. And then we eventually realized that, well, the logging is set by verbose, for example. By default, the logging is verbose, and the application is actually doing command line connections. So those credentials are in the log files. So that's probably not a good thing. So that's the idea of, you want to look where the stuff that's going into your application, where it ends up, and how it's handled. And this brings us to the second Death Star, and where we talk about dependencies. So not only do we have to worry about the user inputs we're taking, but we got to worry about any third parties that are associated with our application. So the Empire tried to learn the lesson from the first one. So when they had the second Death Star, rebels came to blow it up. This time they were prepared. They had a third party dependency here with the shield generator down on Endor, right? And this that was their countermeasure, right? And the idea here was that this reduced the risk from the Millennium Falcon coming in, right? But the problem here is that the dependency is now a link in your chain. The old cliche that you're only strong as the weakest link. Well, that was the case here because your dependency is a system, and that system has countermeasures. And if the system has countermeasures, that's because there's threats to that system. So essentially what happens is by having a dependency, you inherit their threats. So what happens when your dependency's countermeasure fails? Then those threats can exploit that dependency. Dependency goes offline, and now your risk is high. And this is all because you're assuming that this dependency is going to be secure. And that's a bad assumption. If it's beyond your control, don't trust it. Just like user input, you shouldn't trust a dependency. So how do we identify these risks? And this is a common, Foursquare, matrix thing. I'm sure you've seen these hundreds of times, but it's a helpful tool. So you got probability on one axis, severity on another, and you just start throwing vulnerabilities and risks and threats against it and see where they land. So category 1, we got low probability, low severity, like information disclosure. Oh, I go to the website, I malform the address, it gives me a verbose error message back from the server. Not a good thing, but it's not the end of the world. Category 2, we got low probability, high severity. This is again the natural disaster. It could happen. Am I going to waste a lot of time on it? Maybe not. I'm going to get an HVAC system. I'm going to have insurance. I'm going to have fire suppression and whatnot. But it's in the grand scheme of things, it's going to come secondary to most other stuff. Category 3, high probability, low severity. So this is going to be like spam, ping sweeps, port scans, that kind of stuff. It happens. Is it a big deal by itself? Not really. It's something we got to look at, but we're not going to waste too much time on. And then category 4, high probability, high severity. This is like a major design flaw. This is a problem. So if you have something like that, that's when you got to stop things and you got to say, let's reevaluate this kind of stuff. So that rolls into stride and dread. These are our two techniques. They're definitely not the end-all be-all, but they're tools that you can use to categorize risks and threats. And this is the kind of stuff that we see when we do like consulting reports. Is telling them that this is secure is really a qualitative measure. It's a measure of quality. It's good or it's bad. It's not very quantitative because we can't say, well, it's 80% secure. So this is a way of kind of giving people who are more comfortable with numbers. So if we look at a particular threat or risk, so for dread, for instance, we say, oh, well, you assign arbitrary numbers. It doesn't matter. It could be 1 through 3, 1 through 5, 1 through 10, doesn't matter. So you assign it some sort of level. You see, for this particular attack, it has on a level, on a 1, 2, 3 scale, it has a 3% chance of, damage. The reproducibility is a 2. You can do it sometimes, you can't do it all the times, but the discoverability is real low. It's really hard for them to find that we have this error. Compared with like, something that may be really easy to discover, but it has a low amount of damage. Then you average all together, so you have some sort of quantifiable number that you can compare to another one and say, okay, you should probably look at this one first before you move on to this one. And then stride is just a way of categorizing different attacks. Is it a spoofing attack? Is it tampering? Some things are going to be, multiple ones. And again, you just assign arbitrary numbers, average it. It gives you something to work from, for priorities and categorizing stuff. Risk management. So we have this risk. It's never going to go away, so we got to deal with it, okay? The Mon Calamari cruiser here has got to deal with the fact that he's going to get blown out of the sky, okay? So what is he going to do with that, So you can accept it, you can transfer it, or you can mitigate it, right? So we can accept the risk. This is basically gambling. This is saying, I know there's a risk, I know it's bad, I know it could happen, but, I can live with the odds. Some people call this risk denial in saying that, okay, I know there's a risk, but I don't believe it's as bad as you think it is. I kind of think that's a bad way of looking at it. So then you can transfer the risk. Now, this can be like a literal transfer in, I want to set up my e-commerce site. I'm a coder. I don't know anything about web servers, so I'm going to have it outsourced. I'm going to have a hosting company deal with the problems of the routers and the firewalls and all that stuff. Or this could be like insurance. I know there's a risk. I know something bad could happen, so I'm going to take out insurance in case it does. So that way, I can mitigate how much damage it's going to cause because they're going to pay for it. And then the third way, mitigation. This is probably the best idea. Try the best you can to reduce the threat, again, to an acceptable level. And this rolls us into countermeasures. So countermeasures are going to be what you use to mitigate that risk, right? They have to be cost effective. Again, we're not going to spend more money, outrageous amount of money to fix something. We're not going to have a 24-hour armed guard to protect the snack bar, right? So the right tool for the job. Again, this goes with the panacea. There's no one fix to everything. You often hear people say, well, I got a firewall, right? That's going to protect me, right? Well, from some things, it's not going to protect you from, a SQL injection attack, because you're asking people to come to your website. So you've got to make sure that your countermeasure, actually works with what you're trying to prevent. And then proportionality. There's no need in overkill here. Again, we got a spam message, so I'm going to take my e-commerce site offline. That's overkill in this sense. So how do we